Welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, we love seeing you live every Thursday night in Facebook land, YouTube land. The chats are always lit. Love seeing you there. And just as a reminder, your chat could show up on the show. And if you can't catch us live, catch the replay or on your favorite podcasting app. You know me, my name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. Next up, let's do Jason Richards since he was so excited last week.
Oh,
Hey,
absolutely. Jason. Hey, John. Jason Richards here, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia. That's Robert down there.
Hey, Robert.
Dumb little Jason. He's sitting secretary of Space Novum. I don't know Space Novum's number.
Don't ever forget it. It's 1183, brah.
1183.
Oh, okay.
So
we're up there.
Nice. Cool. And then who else do we have? We have Joe Martinez. Hey, Joe. How's it going?
Hello. Hey. Hi. Joe Martinez, still worshipful master. Manasseh Lodge number 182. And yeah, not secretary for life like Robert. And damn glad to be here. All right.
Ooh, do you hate me, Joe?
No, I love and adore you, sir.
I love you too.
Mm-hmm.
That's so sweet. And our special guest host for the night, returning in grand fashion, the one, the only, Brother Chris Ruli. How you doing?
Hello. Good evening, guys.
Good evening.
Good evening.
What Masonic accolade would you like to lead off with tonight? What is your...
Just good old-fashioned brother.
Oh, he's one of those.
I know.
I'm one of those weird guys.
What's your favorite title? Well, I love me. It's a good old brother.
You just right. Good old brother.
Good old bro.
You gotta slip your thumbs underneath your suspenders and kind of.
Well, I reckon
while you say it.
Yes.
Nice. Well, it's awesome to see you again,
yes.
Brother Chris. We're gonna have some fun talking about Masonic history tonight. But before we do, let's get into a special shout out for the patrons who support the show. You guys are awesome. Head over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable because Masonic education is awesome. So you should support it.
Yeah.
Agreed. Tarot card of the week. We're at that time.
Oh my goodness.
Jason rushing to his deck.
Get some.
What you got there?
All right. Tonight we have the Green Glyphs Tarot. This is a deck by James Eads out of Los Angeles, California. He does also the Prisma Visions deck and the Light Visions deck. He also does the Green Glyphs Lenormand deck that I think I've showed off before, and also has a rune deck and an oracle deck of the same style. We're going to stick to tarot tonight. Yeah. Yes. So if you need some Mancy for your cardos, then he's the right guy to go to. And tonight we've got, let's see, what do we have here?
On the topic of the Freemasons and the White House, Jason,
this is
pull the card out.
Appropriate.
Ooh.
The Emperor.
The
Emperor.
Good.
Like it.
So Emperor signifying, might, power. It's a very masculine card.
Mm-hmm. Authority, father figures, structure, wisdom. The guy in the chair, right? The guy in the big seat.
Big chair.
The Oriental chair.
And remember, he just basically says, do it.
Do it.
Do it. Unlimited power. Sorry.
Well, we don't have an emperor.
Not sorry.
In the United States, we do have a seat of authority for sure.
That's right.
In the White House. So good pull.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's a great segue into tonight's topic. Can't wait to hear more about it. Because I believe someone in here recently published a book on the White House and Freemasons.
These guys did.
Anyone can publish a book.
That's true.
Anyone at all. So before we dive into the content, I really like how you kind of set the stage, because when I was doing early research as a young Mason full of zeal, I ran into a lot of the same problems you did. So tell me, why is Chris Ruli the guy who's going to be publishing the book on the Freemasons in the White House?
I'm not even sure why I'm the one doing it. This topic's been here for 200 years. Why am I doing this?
Because no one else did.
Honestly, sometimes it's just literally no one thought about doing it. No, when I was serving as the Grand Historian and Librarian for the Grand Lodge District of Columbia, I started about doing this project about 5 years ago, and it was a function of, it was just a practicality. It was like I was getting questions about, emails or questions or phone calls about, hey, Chris, we're trying to do a ceremony or a anniversary of this event, and we think the president participated. Do you know anything? And so I sort of had to go through what was already there, right? There were several books on the topic already written. Some of them were in the 80s or 90s. There was one good one on George Washington, in the 1920s or 30s that collected a lot of this information, but there wasn't one source. And unfortunately, while going through this and trying to compile everything, sort of like what Mark Tabor did with his George Washington book, I realized 3/4 of the information that I found in Masonic papers were either incorrect or some slightly off. Dates were off, people were off, locations were off. And so I sort of had to go through, and the first 3 years were spent just trying to collect information from every Masonic source I can find. Now, fortunately, I lived near the District of Columbia, or in the District of Columbia at the time. Now I live in Maryland, and so I have access to the House of the Temple. I can, reach out to other Masonic libraries of Maryland and Virginia to help me out. And so I was able to go through every Masonic resource, every Masonic book that I could find any preceding. And then COVID happened, and we were all, stuck in our houses, and so I had the additional benefit of now having a lot of free time, doing whatever I could find, listening to great podcasts from brothers, perhaps in this video. And so I, had the process of going through presidential libraries, digital libraries, going to the Library of Congress when they were available to have folks get back into the space. And so I started to look at non-Masonic sources. So one of the great things that COVID did for research as well as Masonic research is it enables a lot of presidential libraries to go digital. And so a lot of that stuff was pushed into the digital space. And so I had the fortunate to go into the Truman libraries, to go to the, Virginia libraries or presidential libraries and pull out a lot of this information. And so 40% of the 450 number of, activities that I found in this book are stuff that never appeared in a Masonic periodical, in a journal, in a newspaper, or anything.
And it's not just that. I mean, that's amazing in itself. And I don't want to undersell what you did as far as like validating, right? Because we've heard facts or we've heard rumors, but until you actually see the lodge minutes, or you have some other circumstantial evidence that supports it, corroborates it, then who knows, right? Because we I don't know, heaven forbid we idol worship these previous
what word are you trying to say?
Yeah.
Idolize?
Idolatrize?
Yeah.
Golly day. As you wish, Jason, as you wish.
Oh, yeah.
As you wish.
That's a good boy.
So I had to go through that process of digging through the weeds to try to find things. And one of the nice things is, now online, there's a lot of great resources and a lot of old journals, Masonic periodicals. A lot of things are being digitized, and we're starting to see, because of copyright, we're starting to see a lot of the 1920s, 1930s books starting to come out and become publicly available. And so I was able to scrape that, pull that into what I call Rulipedia, which is my own sort of document library of all Masonic activities related to the White House and the Freemasons. And so I wrote this book, right? It was an 80 to 90,000 or 90,000 word document. I submitted it to the publisher, and the publisher was like, "This is amazing. Cut this in half because no one will read this." Because no one's going to read a 400 or 800 page book on, with every single reference, citation, note about the Freemasons. And so what we did was I cut it down to a more readable version of the book. In my introduction, which I shared with you guys earlier this week, I even mentioned that I had to take out a lot of the stuff that didn't occur in the area of the District of Columbia or around the White House, just because it would have been a second volume. So there's a lot there. And when I did find something like that in the back of the book, I included a very detailed list of all the activities associated with presidents, their biographies, their Masonic biographies, their resumes, you can call them, which include, references to all these dates. So if it's not covered in the book, if I did find something that I think was legitimate, that was second reference that I could find in a second source, I also included that. And so, it serves to me, it serves as a great resource as if you're just trying to do a presentation for your lodge, or if you want to give this book to your wife or your spouse or your significant other, and you want them to understand a little bit about the history of Freemasonry in the White House and the presidents, I think this is a good primer. Is this the most detailed that gives you every single brother that participated in the Masonic procession to lay the cornerstone? No, that would have been the Art de Hoyos 900-page book that I'd love to publish one day, but that's in the pipeline.
Yeah, release the Snyder Cut.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that is nice about the style that you wrote too is it's storytelling, right? It's not just facts, figures. This person was here on this date. This person was here on that date. They went over here. They had green beans, right? They left. No, it actually, it tells a story of the relationship. Not if the president was a Mason. I don't know if you knew George Washington was a Mason as well.
What?
Strangely, not covered in my book. Not covered at all. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. First of all, as a member of AW22, I would feel terrible if I didn't include George. Actually, Masonic charges would be proffered if I did not include George Washington. So let
me step on that fire a little bit and just say one of the things that I liked about what I read is we get a really good piece of work by you that touches on more than George Washington. Like, believe me, I live in Virginia. We get it. George Washington was a Mason, but there's all these other people that did really important things, and they were also presidents or they were involved with the fraternity. So it's really nice to hear about them as well. So those,
And Washington set the standard for, he literally set the standard for what a Masonic interaction with the presidents and the Masons looks like. He set the standard for how you communicate with the Masons. He set the standard for public events and activities. And so you cannot take away that from him. What I was trying to do in my first chapter, and by the way, these chapters are chronological, so you go through the administrations as you go through it. What I wanted to do in that first chapter was great. We talk about George Washington. George Washington is a presence in the chapter because he's the president. But let's talk about James Hoban. Let's talk about all the stoneworkers and the craftsmen and the sawyers and the tailors and all these individuals that came to the District of Columbia to build the physical space. That's the reason why the book is not called The Presidents and the Freemasons. It's called The White House and the Freemasons, because I wanted to really focus on the people who lived there, who worked there, the people who we don't cover. There was a brother on the chat that said, "Oh, this topic's been covered before. This is boring." Well, this book covers a topic that you don't know: the gardeners of the White House who were Masons. You don't know the executive officers, the secretaries, all these individuals that were there that contributed, that engaged. So I hope that, there's a lot and obviously we'll talk more about it as we go through some of the key things that I found, but I think there's a little bit more there that you'll be surprised to find.
Right. It's Masonry adjacent, right? It's not just about the Masonic presidents, right? So it's
Correct.
Everything that surrounds the fraternalism and the White House. So I think it's a good scoping of the book. Again, something that you don't hear much about.
Right.
I mean, one chapter I think I'm super interested in general is your chapter on anti-Masonry and the anti-Masonic period. So
John Quincy Adams was, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jason. John Quincy Adams might be one of my favorite presidents who dealt with Masons. If we make the claim that Truman was the most Masonic out of all, he was the most active, he was a past Grand Master, he knew his ritual well, the night of when he became president of the United States, he was going to go to AW22 because he had a brother of his, or a brother, not a physical brother, but a brother of his lodge back in Missouri. His son was going to be initiated or petitioned on. And so that was one of the things that he was thinking of the minute after he was sworn in. He thought, well, I had my obligation to go to AW22. Let's make sure we send a guy over. So if you're talking about a guy like Truman, who was very active, who supported, who knew what he was doing, John Quincy Adams is perhaps the antithesis of that, where he was not a Mason, but he was thoroughly involved in Masonry because he was forced into it. There were, and we have letters between his father, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams. I call him JQA. Between him, where they talk about Masonry. John Adams says, listen, I was there when the founding fathers were forming the government. Masonry didn't play a critical part, but we saw how Masonry played a critical part in Europe. We understand that Masonry somehow had an effect there in Europe with Masons and within the different, political and different kingdoms and monarchies. And so Adams was acutely aware of Masonry, and he passed down that discussion to his son. And it frustrated John Adams, or John Quincy Adams, so much because after his father died, so many Masons and non-Masons reached out to him inquiring, well, surely your father was a Mason, because he was so active in the founding of the government. And John Adams would say, no, he was not. JQA said my father was not. And in fact, he was frustrated. One of the things that was really great, one of the things that I'm so sort of fortunate, and right now I'm writing up, and I'm hopefully Sean Iyer will publish my letters. I actually went through and pulled all the Masonic references to John Quincy Adams's diary. So his diary is digitized. It's available online. You can go through it yourself. I went through it myself, and I pulled out all the Masonic references. There is a mention. He spends a week copying down a Masonic cipher. He is not a Masonic president. He was never initiated, but he wanted to learn more about it. And so one of his colleagues at the time, he was not serving as president. He was as anti-Masonic member of Congress. He took a week to write down and transcribe a Masonic cipher from the Entered Apprentice all the way to the Knights Templar. He knew about Masonry. He read about Masonry. He understood Masonry better, I would argue, than some Masonic presidents, than some non-Mason presidents in the administration. And towards the end of his life, what was the last book he published? He published Letters on a Masonic Institution, which were letters between him and Robert Livingston, who at the time was a high-ranking Mason. I think he was a Grand High Priest at some point. And so he was having these discussions, making the arguments, making the claims that, look, I've read these papers. I've read your ciphers. I've read the obligations. And these things are fine, but they don't really, to him, he thought that this institution was just a silly social club. And any of these legitimate cases that any of these Masons were making about, we did this, we did this, we did this. Well, show me where in the ritual you make these claims. So he has a really interesting, and I hope you read the book. I hope you also check out the Philalethes, which covers his papers and his diaries, because it really, to me, underscored, we don't talk about John Quincy Adams enough in Masonry to understand the anti-Masonic concept or what he was pushing. Sorry, that was a long diatribe.
JQA for the win.
JQA.
No, that's what we have you here for, is long diatribes.
Yes.
Yes.
So go ahead, Jason.
So Chris, can you give us one or two of the most interesting things to you personally that you were able to put into the book? Just things that just wouldn't occur to anybody else.
So you mean like interesting interactions, or
interesting interactions, interesting events, interesting, something that might go against, conventional wisdom, or like,
well,
whoa, wait, he did that, or etc.
Yeah. I think the two that sort of struck me that I was like, this is really cool when I found it. It was in newspaper clippings. It wasn't even a Masonic source. This is part of that 40%. It was cool that Abraham Lincoln received a Knights Templar escort to a Masonic event. Well, it wasn't like a traditional. It was a social event that happened to be sponsored by Masons. And there was one of his assistants at the time who actually was a high-ranking. He was in fact the Grand Master of the Grand Encampment of the Knights Templar. His name is Benjamin B. French, and I may have covered him in a previous video. I love BBF, not just because Joe's a member of BBF Lodge.
We're getting some feedback. Sorry about that.
Not only
okay,
not
I
only
took
that,
care of
it. French was acutely aware of his position in the United States at the time as a high-ranking member of the fraternity. In fact, I would argue that he was the highest-ranking Masonic official. One of the cool things about his diary, which is also at the Library of Congress, he had such an interesting engagement with the president because at the day of when so French was originally a Democrat. He switches over and becomes a Republican because he was disenchanted and disillusioned with what was happening with the Democrats back then in 1850 something. He switches over and becomes a Republican. He actually serves as the chief marshal of Abraham Lincoln's inauguration. He sets up the whole project. He then is hoping to get a job in the administration. He's been looking for it. He's hoping for it. And he didn't get one until the day of, I think it was April 14th or 15th of, Lincoln's first administration. He comes in the office. He asks the president, is there another opportunity? Are there any opportunities for a job? And he goes, actually, Mr. French, I do have a job for you. I think we're going to nominate you as Commissioner of Public Buildings, which is basically a precursor to the Architect of the Capitol. And it just so happens he said, but please give me some time, because now French didn't realize this, but earlier that morning, Lincoln found out that the Confederate Army, or what would become the Confederate Army, launched an attack on Fort Sumter.
Right.
And so this becomes French now is enveloped in the politics and in the Masonry of Washington, D.C. He is still the Grand Encampment. He was a past Grand Master, served for 7 to 8 years as a Grand Master of D.C., personally laid the cornerstone of the Washington Monument and the Smithsonian during his term as Grand Master. Later on, he joins Lincoln's administration as Commissioner of Public Buildings and basically serves as the ambassador of Freemasonry to Lincoln. He is the one that helps, they pass this really interesting resolution of supporting the president through a Grand Encampment. And that's one of the very few instances of political resolutions passing national Masonic organizations saying we support the president, we believe what the president is doing a good thing. And you have these small little events. And so one of those small little events that I just randomly find in a newspaper, never mentioned in any other newspaper, never mentioned in his, well, actually he does mention it in his diary, but that's the only other place where it's mentioned, is French is also leading this program as a fundraiser to help raise money for women of veterans who died in the war, widows of veterans. And they have this big Masonic, it's a big ball, and the Masons were basically going to sponsor the last night of the ball. And so French mentions to the president, hey, Mr. President, this is the last night of this event. It would be really great if you attended. And so French gets, Lincoln and his party to attend the session. French arrives at the front door of the event. He whisks the president in. A row of Knights Templar, sort of create a line in the middle of the dance hall. They march through that line. The president speaks for a little bit. There's a little bit of a speech. And I think this is the time when there's a little, Masonic, or not Masonic, Templar drill practice or formation or drill that occurs. And so the event, probably he stays at the event for about an hour or an hour and a half. But that's one instance of a Masonic activity with Abraham Lincoln. Now, French is the one. Benjamin French is the one who solidifies to me that, you know, there was a letter after the president was assassinated. There was a letter, I believe it was from a past Grand Master of New York, reaching out to French saying, "Do you know if the president had ever an interest in Freemasonry?" Well, according to French's own personal statement, his response to that past Grand Master, he said that he knew that he told him that he would be interested in joining Freemasonry after his term as president was over. And wow. That's the only thing that he knew. Now, he heard that from the guy who it would have been easily for him to facilitate a Masonic initiation and get him through the Masonic degrees. This, you know, French would have made sure that Lincoln would have been taken care of from a Masonic standpoint. And so there was an incentive for him to try to do it, but he never pushed the subject with Lincoln because there was obviously a lot of stuff going on that he needed to focus on.
Should have joined a one-day class. That's all I'm saying.
One-day conferrals, man. I'll tell you.
Slipped right on in.
Yeah. Could have had it at Ford's.
Theater seating.
Yeah.
So French has those. That's one of those interesting little tidbits. The other one that I just found particularly interesting was Eleanor Roosevelt's engagement with the Masons. We don't really talk about the vice president, the first ladies engaging with the presidents. In fact, I couldn't find any Masonic paper on it in any journal. But go through Eleanor Roosevelt's diary, go through the Knights Templar of the District of Columbia, and we find when Eleanor Roosevelt was serving as First Lady, every single year there was a Masonic, we call it an Easter sunrise service, and I'm sure Masons or Knights Templar are certainly very familiar with that project. And so every year the Knights Templar would invite her and her husband to participate in those ceremonies. Now, given Franklin D. Roosevelt's condition, his health condition, he was in no position to march. He was no position to, in fact, the White House was keeping his health condition a secret. And so she served as the ambassador to Freemasonry, the patroness, I like to say, for Knights Templar. She attended almost every single one of those sessions if available. She went to about 8 or 9 of those. She rarely missed one. If she missed one, it was because she was traveling out and she wouldn't make it back.
Now, why do you think that is? What was her fascination with the Masons?
I think she really found the organization interesting. She certainly understood and saw what the Masons were doing from a philanthropic standpoint. She saw that this was a non-denominational religious event, and so I think she saw that there was something important here and something good here. In fact, there are other references of her receiving. She welcomed a delegation of tall cedars. She welcomed a delegation of Masonic clubs, which were very popular in the 1920s and 1930s. They had a national convention. She received that national convention in the district, and so she sort of served as the Masonic contact at the White House while FDR was away. Ironically, you would think FDR would be the one that was very active and would attend meetings, but he really didn't. It was Eleanor who did so. And so I'm quite pleased, and I was very surprised when I started to collect that information, going, this is a whole section. You can do a whole thing on just Eleanor Roosevelt.
And apparently BBF as well.
And BBF, yeah. That's one of my goals in my life is to sort of curate the Benjamin B. French papers and pull the Masonic papers and his notes on Masonry. All that stuff is at the Library of Congress.
First. That's the next.
You heard it here. Well,
that's the next one.
There's some other books in the pipeline.
Chris, all I can think about as you're talking about this is it's like when we read, we would go out and we would read something like A House Undivided.
Right.
And then Mike Halloran comes out with his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, which destroys some of those stories, but then tells even more amazing things that happen in the background. And it's very similar. I've read through I've read, I don't know, maybe I've read thousands of Masonic papers over the years. And so many of them have this sort of romanticized anecdotal stories about the presidency or people adjacent to the presidency. And some of them quite unbelievable. Some of them, you're reading it and you're going, that's just a really nice romantic tale.
Right.
However, I highly doubt it. And it seems like what you've done here really is give it's almost like the extraordinary from the ordinary. You know what I'm saying? It's really a sweet, nice look at a lot of these things that truly just would never typically see the light of day without somebody with your passion putting them on the page.
Well, I appreciate that. And I hope Mike will be okay with me revealing that Mike was the editor of my book. And so Mike Halloran, who is an expert on Freemasonry and the Civil War. And so nice. I am very pleased. I sometimes feel like I'm annoying Mike because of all the information I sent him. And but no, he's been very helpful. And he was the one that, he would go through it and tell me, really focus on this. The stuff that you have here is really great and really up because, again, like you said, we get these stories. There's like this telephone game, and I'm sure you guys all know this. There's this telephone game of like, here are the 5 same facts on President XYZ, and it gets repeated in every Masonic journal and every Masonic whatever, and so I can certainly understand from a Mason who's been maybe a Mason for 20 years or 30 years, and it's like, oh, I know everything about the presidents because it's the same 5 or 6 facts and factoids. Well, I'm here to tell you that the field of Masonic or Freemasonry in the presidency of the United States is still in this nascent, undeveloped quarter. There's still so much stuff out there. Cutting a lot of stuff from this book hurt me because I was just like, I wish I could put all this into a 1,000-page tome because people, maybe 12 people will buy this book, maybe if it was, but there's a lot of there. And the final point to that is, I think when we focus on these fantastical stories, the District of Columbia is arranged in a certain position, or, these stories that you see on a certain books written by a certain non-Masonic author. When we focus on those and we don't focus on, or we don't put a lot of time on these interesting stories about the Knights Templar marching on the White House. And I think, John, you have a photo of that on the slide there of, the annual Masonic or regular annual Masonic, they called it the White House Templar inspection. Knights Templar would routinely visit the White House and have the Presidency of the United States, watch them process. They would acknowledge their arrival. They would march through the gates of the White House onto the White House grounds. They would perform a drill ceremony, and then they would leave. And then they would either go to a religious service, or they would go back to their Masonic Hall on 13th Street. They would have these events, but who would know about them? And to me, these are just as fantastic. These are just as interesting. These are just as engaging, that you have hundreds of thousands of knights at certain times, especially when there was a grand conclave in DC, marching on the Capitol, marching on Pennsylvania Avenue, regularly, routinely. This started, by the way, this Masonic White House inspection ceremony began during President Grant's administration. Ulysses S. Grant. There are references of him coming out and watching the Knights Templar march through the White House. And we have those, fortunately, we have those in newspaper records and some, but not many, official Knights Templar proceedings. These ceremonies occur in regularity through McKinley, through Taft, and end around Herbert Hoover's administration. In fact, a week or two after the stock market crash, the Knights Templar continue and still do their drill and White House inspection ceremony.
See,
and
they caused it.
I think one of the reasons why we have the annual Knights Templar Easter sunrise service is because of this fact. It's because they got some flack, and the Knights Templar in DC got flack for this, and so they decided we've got to do something that's a little bit more inclusive and more supportive of what's going on, and then they switched over to a Knights Templar, the Easter sunrise service.
That makes sense.
I gotta say, you can really tell when we have a guest on who knows their stuff. Chris,
well, I appreciate it.
I mean, honestly, this incredible text you've put together aside, you're just blowing us away, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
John, you were sharing a picture there. So this is actually during Ford's administration, excuse me, not Reagan, Ford's administration. The picture on the left.
We're going to fast forward, right?
Yes. Yeah, if you don't mind. So this is another one of these interesting things. Now, up until Ford's administration, it was really Truman, right? Truman was the last Masonic president, but Ike Eisenhower attended the Masonic breakfast in Washington, D.C. Nixon met Masons at his residence as well as at residence while he was vice president and the White House. We have pictures of Nixon meeting the Scottish Rite Masons. My favorite picture, by the way, is JFK shaking hands with members of the Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction. I just love that picture. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't think about sharing it, but it's in the book, and perhaps you can take a look at it. This, however, what you're seeing here is a memo during Ford's administration when Ford would regularly receive, invites to attend and honorary memberships. And so on the left-hand side, you see that it was the 33rd degree class in, I think it's Michigan. And so these are the types of letters, again, digitized. The presidential libraries are now being digitized so greatly that you can find these online. And so I found this memo online, and William Timmons, who was a secretary supporting the White House, was reaching out and saying, okay, do we want to do this? It looks like it's not a problem, but you can see at the bottom of the page here, I see no negative in authorizing a class to be designated in your honor. However, to Masonic visibility, they're talking about the visibility of Freemasonry. They're talking about, is this a good idea or is this not a good idea? On the second page, the thing on the right is a list of Masonic honorary memberships that Ford received during, I think, this 1974 part of his administration. Now, what I didn't show you, unfortunately, because I just didn't have enough space, was this was part of a memo that Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld were highlighting and saying he can join this one, he cannot join this one. He can join this one, he cannot join this one.
Really?
They were going through identifying what are the politically advantageous affiliations to support, what are the ones that are not supportive. And so this, again, is one of these things you don't talk about, you don't hear about it, but Cheney and Rumsfeld were signing off on, do we want him to be a member of Ararat Temple in Kansas City, Missouri? Well,
I don't see the turtles on here.
Well,
I mean, bet your sweet ass you don't.
It's a nice kid-friendly show we had while it lasted.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, they've heard that word before. So can you go back to that slide,
Sure,
John? So on this, Chris, in your research, have you found other documents like this where they said, no, you can't join the Masons? Or
so the way that the documents were presented were with that at the bottom there, you'd see it was like, no objection, see me, or I think ask to have a rain check, see me, or no objection. And so we don't know. I don't know if the president ordered them to sign off on these. I don't know if the president had a veto power. We just have a static look at those memos as they were digitized. So unfortunately, I couldn't tell you if Ford had like the final say or declined. Now, some of these Masonic organizations maybe certainly know more than I do, because they would have gotten a letter saying yes or no. But at the very least, this material is out there. It's in the presidential libraries. You can go yourself and find them. You don't need a schmuck like me to do it for you. You can go and find it yourself and start to read and see those things. You'll start to see that this was not done during Truman accepted he was a Mason through and through. Ford had to be, because of his position and because of the nature of how he got into the presidency, he had to be very careful about his perception. And unfortunately, in the 1970s and 80s, we're starting to see a shift in what the president or who the president can engage with. And what I noticed was right around that time, the 70s and 80s, the focus was not on look at these Masonic principles that we want to inculcate or talk to you about. It was look at the charity, look at the financial things that we're doing to help our neighborhoods, our communities, the Scottish Rite, Eye Center, the Knights Templar Foundation. The focus went from Masonic principles, discussing Masonic principles or those values, to let's talk about the charity. Let's talk about how much money we're making. My money we're making, I mean, in terms of fundraising and financing. And that in itself is something you can spend a whole, meeting talking about, right? Like, why did we go from that shift from esoteric to we're just another society that's doing fundraising and lots of Freemasons were former presidents,
over
and so we're
personality,
here.
right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we got one more picture here.
Yeah, I love this picture, and I because at the bottom of the picture, so I went through. So one of the cool things is starting in, I believe it was Calvin Coolidge's administration. Well, the first secretary, the press secretary, really started with Calvin Coolidge. And in fact, I do have a note from Calvin Coolidge when they didn't have a press secretary. He went out and spoke to the press himself. So he answered questions. He did all the stuff that you would now have a press secretary for. And so in one of those, they talked about creating a diary of daily activities to track his activities. Well, what you see here is right from Ford's daily activity for that day when the Masons participated in a ceremony in the White House. And what they were doing was basically conferring the Royal Arch and the cryptic degrees in the Oval Office. And here's a photographic evidence of the DC Grand Chapter and Grand Council that performed it. Take a look at the start time and the end time. What was that? 30 minutes? They conferred the entire thing in 30 minutes. In fact, what they did was they went to the Roosevelt Room. They opened up a special session of the Grand Chapter and the Grand Council. They then walked across the hall into the Oval Office. They assembled, and we have photographs from the photographers taking photographs of them assembling the altar and doing all that stuff. They then conferred, they kicked the photographers out who weren't Masons. They conferred the degrees through, an proclamation. They showed them the grip, the words, the signs, everything. And then after 30 minutes, they went back to the Teddy Roosevelt Room and closed the session down.
I was going to say, that's easily
amazing.
Like an hour and a half degree.
Look, what's better than a 1-day conferral? 30-minute conferral in the Oval Office.
Yeah, in your living room. Love it.
It's like when John listens to Audible on 3x speed.
Love it. Can't get enough.
And by the way, that's the only mention, right? Like that little sliver, like you could have, if I didn't hit Control F on that day and maybe typed in something else, even look how Masonry was slightly, messed up in the OCR. I could have missed it.
That's a really cool
little
point.
reference.
So let me just clarify.
Yes.
So there was actually Masonic degrees happening in the White House.
Not the first, by the way. That's not the first.
What?
I was about to ask. So
say more.
Well, of course, that there's the secret room where all the Masonic degrees are conferred.
Yes,
every
obviously,
year.
where they store the skulls.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we know that Benjamin B. French was the first one to initiate or perform an initiation. Again, Joe's favorite guy, Benjamin B. French, initiated Andrew Johnson into the Scottish Rite at the White House. And that was a two-man job. They went in, they had lunch, then they went into his personal residence, and they conferred the 4th to the 32nd degree within, I think I'm going to say, a couple hours.
I did not know that.
No PowerPoint?
Then why
No PowerPoint.
Then
No
why
degree
do we
for
need
PowerPoint?
like 20-person degree teams?
Yes.
2-man operation. One guy holding the book and one guy slapping him in the face. That's what I think.
and one to correct him. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Hey, Chris, I got a question.
Please.
Since you're on this vein,
Yeah.
a couple of people have asked this in the chat.
Sure.
Has a blue lodge, a craft lodge, ever been opened in the White House?
No. Well, The reason why I don't know the answer to that is because the Federal Lodge #1 records begin at 1806. The White House started construction. I'm sorry, not 1806. Oh, no, it is 1806. Yes, that's right. The White House construction began in 1794, 92, 93, 94. And so we don't have the first decade of Masonic activity for the White House, unfortunately. What I would assume is because at least 10 of part of Federal Lodge that helped build the White House, there were about 10 or 12 known Masons from that lodge. There are about 20 or 30 Freemasons that we know that helped during that initial construction. Now, that's out of 150 workers. So to make the claim, by the way, that only Masons built the White House is incorrect, or that Masons, we helped build the White House, but it doesn't mean that we all just built the White House. Now, I don't know if there was a Masonic activity in and around the White House at that time. But one of the things, and this is one of the things that I mentioned as sort of my key takeaways, is we love to talk about our achievements and activities. And if you're telling me that a Mason had a meeting in the White House, we would have known that. It would have been repeated. It would have been in every single, it would have been something that Federal would be having a meeting every year on that day, letting them know. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. We claim to be a secret society, but when it comes to this stuff, when it comes to all these social activities, these things, we proudly talk about our accomplishments, and we go over them to the point of when people are like, okay, let's stop talking about this because every year you talk about the same thing. Like,
did you know George Washington was a Freemason?
He was a great Freemason. I had to yes. But again, so back to, and I apologize if I'm rambling again, but back to you, Joe, I think what you're trying to go as far as there were initiations that occurred that we know of. Those initiations were often not craft lodge related. It wasn't the first 3 degrees. Taft became a member of the Grotto. There's a famous picture of FDR getting his DeMolay honors.
Honorary, yep.
Yeah, yes, that's right. And I think he wasn't a Legion of Honor. He was an honorary member of the Supreme Council, if that's correct. But someone in the DeMolay will correct me in the chat. And Johnson got his 32nd degree there. Yeah, so there were a couple of Masonic activities, but they were mostly appendant body related. Nothing Blue Lodge, nothing Craft Lodge. And the first Masonic meeting at the Capitol that we know of happened, I think, in the 70s or in the 80s, 1970s, 1980s.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, cool. Hey, I think we need to start bringing it home because we could just nerd out all night.
Yeah, sorry, I can.
But
really
you got to leave something for the people who read the book, right?
40% never covered. So
ever covered.
How much is that?
ever.
Question: How much of that 40% has to do with George Washington?
39.5%.
Zero.
Oh,
0%.
nice.
It's mostly, actually, you know what it is? It's mostly non-Masonic administrations, like Ulysses S. Grant attending Knights Templar balls and dinners. And
nice.
And by the way, when I meant by interactions, what I count as an interaction is a dinner, a Masonic reception, invitations, letters of correspondence, all those types of things. So it's not 100 or 450 meetings at the White House. It's a plethora of different types of activities.
Plethora.
Pinatas.
Of pinatas.
Does the book have pictures, Chris?
Yes, I tried
pictures.
to throw a picture in at least once in each chapter just to entice the reader,
spice it up.
Yes,
because there are Masons who don't read.
Can I answer the question about the White House stones?
Yeah,
may I?
Do it.
Okay, and that's a great. So Truman's secretary, who happens to be a Mason, is alerted to the fact that during the renovation of the White House, they discovered stones down in the foundation of the White House. Now, we believe those foundation stones are the same foundation stones that were laid by a group of Freemasons or non-Freemason stone builders.
Operative Masons.
Correct. Operative Masons. Were they all Masonic in nature? No. Remember, I told you 20 to 30 Masons we know of worked in the building. Well, there were 100 and something marks that were discovered. So clearly, some of those Masonic stones that were delivered to each of the Grand Lodges are absolutely connected to the White House, but may not necessarily be connected to a Freemason. And I am trying my best. It's really difficult, but I'm trying my best to compile all of those. So if you are a member of a Grand Lodge and you have access to one of those stones, if you wouldn't mind sharing the picture of it so we can start to place those connections. And because fortunately we do have some individual stones that we can document, but we don't have all of them.
Funny story about that.
Tell me the story.
See, this could get somebody in trouble, but I'll say it anyway.
Don't get
do it. Do it.
No.
Why
do
not?
it.
So
it's not like it's going to be on the internet forever.
No,
do it.
I want to be able to search the transcripts and search it by AI. So visiting St. Louis, there were a couple lodges that got some of those White House stones, and I got a side conversation with illustrious Steve Harrison, who said, "Hey, just so you know, people weren't supposed to know about that. Apparently, it was like a private gift to that lodge, but it was not something that was documented, published, made a big deal out of, right? And so, like, it was kind of one of those, we don't know where it ended up, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then yet this lodge has it on display, in their library, and they show it off to every visitor who comes by. So, I was like, well, sorry, I didn't know that the neon signs pointing to look here at this this stone is a secret."
That literally goes back to what Chris was saying about how we love to advertise all the awesome crap that we do.
Secret Masonic block right here.
Yeah. I love the stone story because it is a nice connection to the White House, regardless of if that was a Masonic stone from a Freemason operative or not. I think it's still a nice connection to the White House. And I think it exemplifies, the resiliency of those stones. They survived burning down of the War of 1812. I mean, they survived all these different things. The stones were still there, and Truman, true to his word, and he was smart. I argue, I think he was smart, and saying, like, I think this is a great PR. I think the White House stones were one of the best marketing jobs ever, because it was a way of connecting Masons who may not necessarily have a connection in California or in Washington or some other states. In fact, they were sent out the side of the United States as well. We have paperwork from outside the United States as well. Yeah, so different places receive these stones. And it's a nice connection to a piece of American history. And that's the point, right? At the end of the day, the stuff that I like, the stuff that I research, and the stuff that RJ mentioned that, like, I can go on and off, is stuff that sometimes isn't really talked about, but I think is inherently part of the mystique of the interest of Freemasonry.
All right. So how about this? As we start to wrap things up, Chris will save you to next to last.
Sure.
But I'll ask the other hosts to name a president and see if Chris can spout off the top of his head.
Oh, come on.
An interesting fact. I know you did a lot of research. This stuff's got to be fresh. If not, we completely understand, because when you get into writing a book, it's kind of hard.
Sure.
And so Joe really wants to go first.
I do.
So I'll let him go last and start with. No, I'm kidding. So I'll start with Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I'm gonna make it really, really easy for you. Tell me about something that we've not heard about George Washington.
Mark Tabbert covered it.
Well, we don't have Mark Tabbert on the show, do we?
That's true. That's true. That's true. I think. Or how about this? We're getting into an interesting part of history. Next year will be a bicentennial of the Marquis de Lafayette's visit to the United States.
Ooh. Now,
according to newspapers, and I've confirmed it in the Masonic biography, or not biography, excuse me, the Masonic proceedings of one of the lodges that participated in his dinner at Alexander Washington 22, Lafayette gave George Washington a set of what do you call it? I believe it's the sash and the jewel that you see in the AW22 portrait. Now, I have no confirmation of that, but that's what I believe.
I like it.
It's
now,
fact
funny thing happened during Lafayette's visit out to the Midwest. Does anyone remember what happened to Lafayette? There was a very unfortunate occurrence that happened on his trip, and those items were lost. I think it's in the Ohio River.
Oh, did he capsize?
It was a shipwreck, and he lost almost all of his Masonic certificates and jewels and all those things because it went under one of the rivers. So we don't know if his Masonic George Washington stuff survived.
Wow.
Ooh.
Because there is no record of it. And most of Lafayette's original papers were lost on that trip when the ship capsized. It sort of ran aground. It was the middle of the night. And even that evening, now, luckily everyone survived. We were able to get off the boat. And Lafayette slept on a mattress under an umbrella on the side of the river that night.
Thanks, Ohio.
I believe it was Ohio. Now, again, I'm not a Lafayette expert, even though I claim to be, but that's an interesting George Washington story.
I like it.
So
if
there's a brother out there going spelunking or deep diving into that river, you may find George Washington's jewels or his sash.
Nice. Nothing like finding George Washington's jewels. Robert.
Hi-yo.
Hey-o.
All right, so I've got one, and if you don't know anything, then I'll ask you your opinion on something.
Sure.
So, Rutherford B. Hayes.
Rutherford B. Hayes, if I'm remembering myself correctly, he was a member of the temperance movement. And so Rutherford B. Hayes was not a Mason. I believe Rutherford B. Hayes's father was a Mason. And so there is a apron. I don't remember where Rutherford B. Hayes is from, but there's an apron of his father in that affiliated Grand Lodge.
Man, you're too good.
I'm not sure if it's Rutherford B. Hayes that I'm thinking of, but I believe he was in the temperance movement, and so he was not affiliated with Freemasonry.
Somebody saying RBH was from Ohio, so it could all be with the Lafayette jewels. Everything is converging in Ohio, people. We got to get
Ohio.
By the way, the Mississippi River, lots of tributaries. Maybe it's Mississippi, maybe it's Ohio. Mea culpa, it's not in my Washington, D.C. White House history.
I applaud you for going off the cuff.
Yes.
Jason.
Brother Chris, tell me, if you would, a little bit about Millard Fillmore's Masonic connection.
Baby, do I know something about Millard Fillmore? Millard Fillmore started his Millard Fillmore started his political career as an anti-Mason. He joined anti-Masonry as a congressman. He immediately after winning his seat said, "I'm not affiliating with this group. They're all a bunch of crazies." And so he went rogue and lost his seat afterwards. But when Millard Fillmore got into the White House eventually, it was the time his administration aligned with the cornerstone laying ceremony for the extension to the United States Capitol. So not the first part of the Capitol, but the extension to grow because the size, they were building a bigger building. And so that was the first extension. I want to say in 1851, and someone can tell me I'm wrong in the chat, and that's fine. He declined to have the Masons participate because he said, well, if I've got to bring the Freemasons, I've got to bring the Red Men, I've got to bring the Temperance, I've got to bring the Oddfellows, I've got to bring all these other people. And I don't want to bring all these other people. Can't we just have our own little ceremony? And do we really need to bring the Masons involved? Now, Benjamin B. French, this is like Pee-wee's Playhouse. Whenever I say the word, you all have to, do something. Yeah, exactly. So when Benjamin B. French finds out about it, he goes, I told you so. I don't know why. By the way, he was Grand Master that time. He's like, I told you so. What did you expect? And this is from his diary. He said, it smelled like the stench of anti-Masonry or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. But he was like, yeah, of course. He's an anti-Mason. He never liked the Masons. Of course he wouldn't have the Masons come and perform this ceremony. Well, according to French's journal, he says that set off all the other Masons in Congress and in Washington, D.C. And so as part of that, rebuke of him saying, no, thank you, no Masons are in my ceremony, there was enough pressure applied on the president to make him change his mind. Now, here's what Millard Fillmore does, because he's just a great guy. He says, well, fine, I'll let the Masons come. And they have 4 days to prepare a massive ceremony and cornerstone ceremony. Now, all of you brothers know it takes a lot less time to organize a massive Masonic event and ceremony. Not only 4 days, because we're so efficient and we're so good at our ability to organize. And so he said, well, fine. As a little turn of the screw, he said, I'll give him 4 days. Good luck. So Benjamin French had to schedule and arrange a massive Masonic ceremony in 4 days. Now, what does French do? I should have a beer right now. What does French do? French
drunk history.
I know. Oh boy. All right. So what French does is, well, he instructs the President of the United States to join him below where the cornerstone is. And he asks him to do the Grand Master's work. I want you to inspect the stone, Mr. President. And I want you to tell me when it's ready to be laid. And so that is the little jab in the heart of Mr. Millard Fillmore.
Sherrod, you are.
Love me some BBF.
Awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
BBF, man. Love it.
All right. So before I get to mine.
It seems like I've convinced Nunya Business that he hasn't heard this new interesting story before.
It's 40%. It's all 40%.
He knew everything. Go ahead.
So let's you know what? If you show off to one guy, that's all that matters. Let's go
You're the best.
Get into where can we find a copy of the book?
It's in pre-order right now through McCoy. And I'd like to say where all fine Masonic books are sold on McCoy.com, of course. It's right now on pre-order, and we hope to have books in mid-September. So if you've already ordered, I know that initially we said that it was going to arrive in late August, but you should have received an email saying that it got pushed because printing is just so crazy now that there's been a push for that, unfortunately. But mid-September, you can get the book, and I'd be happy to, if I ever see you, I'd be happy to sign it at Masonic Week if you're bringing the book, and happy to come and visit and do Masonic presentations. And if there's any lodges, I reached out to RJ to help me out with that as well. If anyone is interested in having me come as a speaker, I'm happy to come and speak at your lodge event or a regional Masonic retreat.
What's your travel distance?
My travel distance is happy to do so. Happy to go anywhere you want. I professionally go to lots of different countries because I work in infectious disease. And so I am always in places where people don't want to go.
Yeah. Stay far away.
As my wife says, business has been booming the last couple of years.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It has.
I didn't know that before I booked you to come to our lodge in 4 weeks. So thank you.
I'm going to go like this. And then you can back away.
Yes.
Mask up.
Just hug everybody.
Awesome. All right. So it's over to me now.
I'll stay outside the lodge meeting as Tyler
Yes.
that night.
Yes.
Brother Chris, thank you so much. It's been,
Thank you, guys.
All everything I was expecting and more. We appreciate your dedication to the craft, your zeal for knowledge, and just everything you did to pull this together. Because, all kidding aside, this book was way overdue. I'm so thankful for you to pull this together because the amount of information out there has not been validated, has not been corroborated, and it's really extending the breadth of Masonic information and knowledge for you to do this. And hey, look, you've given all these other brothers a great resource to pull from if they want to pull some Masonic education together, because now they've got it from as close to the source as possible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
kudos, man.
Okay, so Present for you. I'm going to see if I can throw you a curveball, and if not,
Oh, man.
I got some other ones lined up.
Oh man,
William Henry Harrison. It's a short timer.
Oh boy. Okay, you ready for this one?
Oh no, you don't.
All right.
He got you.
Oh,
wait,
got me.
wait, hold on. Benjamin Harrison was the son, right? Or no, I'm sorry, the grandson. Is that right?
I believe so.
Okay. William Henry Harrison starts off his career seeking interest in the anti-Masonic vote, right? So this is the time when he's running for president. He is not really a good candidate. The other people who are running for president at the time, I think Henry Clay, a couple other big key figures. William Henry Harrison comes in and he promises, well, I'm going to be the president candidate that brings everyone together. And one of the groups that need to be brought together were the anti-Masons. Now, at this time, when William Henry Harrison was running for office, the anti-Masonry, or anti-Masonry in general, was on a steep decline. They lost their first pitch, their first attempt with a guy. I just forgot his name. He was the attorney general, and I just forgot his name. And who was the presidential candidate? He was from Maryland. I forgot his name. Anyway, he lost, and the political party basically fizzled by the 1840s. But there was still a political party. And so by that time, during his first run, his first attempt at running for president, he said, "Great, I'll bring in the Freemasons." Or I'm sorry, the anti-Masons. His next run for office, he goes the opposite way. He goes, "Well, I don't know about these guys. They're not doing so well. They seem to be really fanatical. I mean, like, they go to these conventions and all of their political policies are basically, let's just get rid of secret societies and fraternities." That's one of the things that drives me nuts when people talk about anti-Masonry. Yes, it started with anti-Masonry, Freemasonry, but they wanted to eliminate all secret. It was called all secret oath-based societies. So even the anti-Masons don't get a good rap, right? So anyway, at this time, he's like, I'm not sure about bringing these guys in, but here's what I'll do, because I need their votes. We'll do a don't ask, don't tell. I'm not going to ask you if you're a Mason, and you are not going to tell me if you're a Mason. And as long as we're good with that, then you can serve in my administration. The anti-Masons are excited. Okay, great. Well, it seems like he's amenable to our policies. We just don't want these Masons in there, and maybe we'll convert him and change him, because initially he was very interested, but now he's not so much because the party's not doing well. And so he somehow finagles, and basically they receive his support. Well, what happens with William Henry Harrison? I'm sure you guys know.
Dies in 30 days.
He dies because that day in Washington, D.C., in his inauguration, it is one of the coldest days on record. It was sleety. It was rainy. It was not a good time to not wear a coat. It was not a good time to not wear a hat. And it was not a good time to not be in a carriage. And all of those things he declined. He refused to wear his coat. He refused to wear his hat. He refused to be in a carriage. He wanted to ride on a horse. And to add,
like my 6-year-old.
Sounds like my 10-year-old. Yeah, exactly.
So at the end of, yeah, that's true. At the end of the inauguration, by the way, longest presidential speech in record. So not only that, but he speaks the longest. He's like me right now. He's speaking so much time. And so he commands the floor. Afterwards, he gets a little sick because he's also attending all these events, and he's a slightly older man. And so he falls and dies. No, he doesn't literally fall, but he gets sick. I think it's pneumonia. I think he dies from pneumonia 30 days later. Mm-hmm. Destroying any attempt by the anti-Masons. They thought they won. They finally had a candidate. Their first candidate lost. We finally got a good guy who said, we'll enact a don't act, don't tell policy. I don't want to know that you're a Mason, and don't tell me that you're a Mason, and we'll be fine. And so the anti-Masonic party withers away and dies with the last gasp of William Henry Harrison.
Man.
Wow.
Kudos.
I've literally been working on this for 5 years.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We couldn't tell, right?
Well said. Well said.
Hypothermia. Thank you, Dennis. Brother Kramer.
Nice. Awesome. Well, excellent job, Brother Chris. Again, second kudos and thank you for TMR, and congratulations on the book in advance.
Thank you.
So with that, you know where to find the book. Go to McCoy.com and you can go search up the book. It'll be out very soon. And I do want to give a special shout out to Brother Chris for writing all the way up through and including the 47th president. So that was really good that you had the foresight to get ahead of the election, find out which Masonic president is coming up next. And if you want to find out, you got to buy the book. So, so stay tuned for that. With that, I want to thank you all very much for watching and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.
Wow.